And so we're joined now by Sam Sweeney, a producer at ABC News. Sam, you and I exchanged messages just before you left Ukraine. And it occurred to me, I said to you, travel safely. And usually it's just sort of a pleasantry that people say to each other when somebody's going to take a trip. But when you're saying that to somebody who's leaving Ukraine for the second time recently, there's something extra. Glad to see you made it back safely to the States.
Yeah, it's good to be here. I mean, there's certainly a risk with going to Ukraine, but we have a number of measures in place to help protect us and keep us safe, and a team that travels with us to help do that as well. But there's certainly an inherent risk that you can't avoid when traveling there. But luckily, we're safe. Our team has been safe, and we hope it stays that way.
Yeah, and I want to get to some of that. First, just take me back. I mean, you typically work at ABC News' transportation unit alongside Gio Benitez. When we see those stories breaking, it's you at the core of that. And I guess you get a call sometime in February that you're not going to, for a while, be talking about, I don't know, pilot shortages at airlines. You're going to be doing something very different. Could you tell me about that moment when you learned where you were going to be going before the war started?
Yeah, so it's a massive undertaking, this type of coverage for a major network here in the U.S. And sometimes you need to pull from people from other parts of the news division that normally don't go out into the field or don't travel internationally or cover war. But when you have such a major operation with so many people and so many moving parts, you just need to pull from different, areas of the network. So my boss called and said, would you be willing to go to Ukraine tomorrow with Martha Raddatz? And I was in West Virginia at the time, and I said yes, and rushed together and got everything I needed to get done, and got a COVID test and got equipment, and I was on a plane within 24 hours. And that was before the war, really started. So when we got there, everything was normal. People were going out to dinner. The opera was open. Restaurants were, packed. People were going to the movies. It was normal. And it was hard to believe that, that there could be a war there. And the locals didn't even believe it. And I remember I was traveling with Martha, and she said to the mayor, "Are you prepared for, several 100,000 refugees, or more than 1 million refugees, to show up here in Lviv," which is the city where a lot of the members of the media have been stationed. And a lot of embassy personnel from around the world have been stationed because it is relatively safe. And the mayor, said, "We're ready." And I just thought to myself again, like, there's no way that, that the war is going to break out and there's going to be hundreds of thousands of refugees showing up. And then a couple of days later, that's exactly what happened.
And if I recall correctly, you've really seen different phases here, because you crossed with refugees out of the country. Then you were back in the States, and then you made it back to Ukraine after the war had started.
Yeah, we had only planned to be there for a week. Martha anchored the Sunday show this week from there. And then we were going to do a couple of days, and then we actually had to be back. Martha came back for State of the Union, and I was in the process of buying a house. So we were supposed to leave through Poland, or thought we were going to leave through Poland. But then that's when the refugee surge started. And there was tens of thousands of people showing up at the border. The lines were 50 hours long. The traffic jams were 10 to 20 miles long just to get to the border. So we ended up going through a rural border up in the mountains, in the Carpathian Mountains, and we walked into Slovakia. And it still took several hours to do that. And there was only a couple of hundred people there at the time. But just a surreal experience to see women and children saying goodbye to their fathers and their husbands, not knowing when they're going to see them again because martial law was in place and men between 18 and 60 couldn't leave. And these people are asking for refugee status. They're asking for asylum. So the lines are really long at the border. And then we walked across, Martha and I, and then we luckily had a van waiting on the other side that drove us for another 7 or 8 hours to Vienna. But it's just an unbelievable thing to witness these people waiting out in the freezing cold, young children, infants, toddlers, just to get to safety on the European continent. It's a pretty remarkable thing to see.
And then you, as you said, went to Vienna. You were back in the U.S. And I remember speaking with you before you were going to be flying back to Ukraine. You said you're flying to Germany. So it sounds like you're probably connecting there onto somewhere else. How did you get back to Ukraine?
So Martha turned to me as soon as we left and she said, I think we have to go back. And, I agreed with her. You don't lead the biggest story in the world and not go back. So we flew back almost immediately. I think we were home for 8 days. And we flew into Warsaw, Poland. And then we took a van from Warsaw the next morning into Lviv and crossed over. And very few cars crossing in except for humanitarian trucks, stocked with supplies and food. But a lot of cars coming out.
Yeah, very much. Anybody who's ever said they were going against the traffic in rush hour or something like that has never gone against traffic like that, have they? And so did you see any places, you talked about being there before the war and now you just came back, places that had, well, for lack of a better word, transformed in a very bad way, where something had been there and then it's just not there?
I mean, the airport in Lviv, I flew into the Lviv airport the first time. Beautiful new facility. And then it was closed. And then on this last trip we were there, it got hit with an airstrike. And some of the windows got blown out, but really they were targeting an aircraft technical facility nearby. But still a lot of damage. And of course, all airspace has been closed in Ukraine. It's just surreal. And you hear the air raid sirens going off all night and all day, and people rushing into bomb shelters, not knowing what's going to happen. But luckily in Lviv, it's been largely spared. The eastern part of the country is what has really taken the beating. And a central part of the country where Kyiv is. But again, the Ukrainians have been holding the Russians back. And now they believe that they don't even have the power to take Kyiv. They've lost, the latest report from NATO is 15,000 Russian troops have been killed, 15 generals. So the Russians have really miscalculated this.
Yeah. What would surprise people the most about your role there? You're part of a team, obviously, with Martha and others. So we see the pictures. What's something that we just can't appreciate that you've really come to appreciate by being there as part of all that?
I mean, it's hard to really put that into words because there's just so much happening there. There's people in Lviv who live there who are comfortable and they're staying and they are going about their life and running their business and going to work as normal. But then in the same city at the same time, you have hundreds of thousands of refugees, people who have been shot at and their cars have been hit with shrapnel and they've seen their family members die or showing up in the same exact city, desperate to get out of the country, with just a couple of suitcases. And that juxtaposition is just mind-blowing that it's all happening in this one little place. And just a couple of weeks ago, these people were just like you and I, living a normal life with their families in their homes, going to work, going out to dinner, and now they're refugees and they don't know their future and saying goodbye to half their family because their brothers and their fathers can't come. I mean, just seeing all that is it's hard to wrap your head around. A lot of people ask when do we sleep, because it's 7 hours difference there, and Martha's on the air for Good Morning America for when they break in for special reports. And then again on World News Tonight, which is at 1:30 in the morning. And you sleep in chunks, a couple hours here, a couple hours there. Air raid siren goes off, you're back up for TV. Then you're back out to collect the news and collect the stories during the day there to then present them to America overnight. So it's kind of, it's just nonstop.
You mentioned that there are people just going about their lives. When we see the pictures, of course, we understand it's your job to show us what has changed, the destruction. How pervasive is that destruction? Are we seeing what is going on in most of these cities, part of these cities, just a small part of these cities? How widespread is that?
I mean, it really depends on where you are. If you're in Mariupol, I mean, most of the city is destroyed. Kyiv, there's lots of buildings and parts of it are destroyed. Shopping malls are destroyed, but not the entire city. But as you head further west, there's a lot less damage because there's been a lot less missile strikes. They're targeting those major cities, the border cities near Russia, especially in the east. But what you will see across the country are checkpoints at every single, village, neighborhood, and then just randomly along some of the major roads, you're stopped. There's big, huge I-beams, that you would see in construction sites in the U.S., but they put them in crosses, and they're anti-tank devices to really, stop those tanks, slow traffic down. And they put different blocks in the road, so you cars have to, zigzag through them to slow you down. And they'll do a passport check, and they're just looking for people, possibly Russians that have infiltrated in. And they want to stop them to see, what's going on, who's coming in, who's going, are there weapons in the vehicle? And they have these big blast walls that are, big white sandbags stacked, 8 to 10 feet high, which they would use for, protection if they had to have a shootout. And you'll see those all across the country, on roads, everywhere you look, you'll see that. And that's just the reality of things there right now. But again, the destruction is really localized to certain cities in certain parts of the country. In the West, a lot of people are continuing about their daily lives.
It's interesting perspective. That doesn't obviously minimize what's going on to the people who are experiencing that, but just to understand that there is that, as you said, juxtaposition. I know there are some specifics in terms of security that you can't talk about for everybody's good, but generally speaking, can you tell me about how you balance? I mean, you're taking a certain amount of risk when you board that plane headed for a war zone, going into that place that so many people are trying to come out of, balancing that risk with what you're there for, with bringing us the pictures and the information.
Yeah, I mean, look, we do a special training for this. We have equipment, we have people that help us, we have outside contractors, and we're well protected, and we have contingency plans in place to get out when we need to get out. We have vehicles to get us out. We're prepared, but this is different. This is different from Iraq. It's different from Afghanistan. U.S. military is not there to come rescue you. They're not going to be there to evacuate out. We saw the Fox crew that was hit in that horrific attack. And Benjamin Hall, he was stuck there for a while. Because you can't just get on a medevac and get out, and it's really just a different situation, than what we've had in Iraq or Afghanistan, where you can be at a level 1 trauma center within an hour. It just doesn't exist here because the U.S. military is not there. They're not there to rescue you. So there is just an inherent risk that goes with covering a war like this when you're going up against a nuclear power that's indiscriminately, bombing and shelling innocent people. There's really just a big risk there.
And when you see that news of you mentioned the Fox crew, reporter, photographer, a local who was helping them, is your thought generally that they were in some kind of different situation that you wouldn't have been in, or is it more sort of there, but for the grace of God, where it could have been anybody, and the reality is just you're in a war zone and randomly somebody's going to have that happen to them?
The Fox crew is in Kyiv, and that's inherently more dangerous than where I was in Lviv. And I don't know the specifics on their situation of where they were, what they were doing. I know they were trying to reach refugees, but look, the mortars are falling indiscriminately, and they happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And it's a really unfortunate event of what happened there.
Yeah. You mentioned, Sam, the biggest story of a lot of our lives. You were right there in the middle of it. Thank you to you and everybody at ABC for bringing that all to us. I know we all here in the local newsrooms and with our families at home are really depending on that.
We have crews that are still there and will stay there throughout the war. And we have crews in Romania and Poland and still in Ukraine, and they're working around the clock to keep everyone up to date on what's happening and bring you the latest images and just keep everything honest. And you're not getting that in certain parts of the world.
Sam Sweeney, ABC News, you've seen this transformation in a very bad way over the past month. Let's hope someday you can go back there and cover the reconstruction and rejuvenation of a country I know you've really come to love, you said, despite it all.
Yeah, it's a beautiful country, very nice people, and I hope it ends soon.
Sam, thanks so much.
Thank you.